Yeah. Morning, folks. I've managed to get the live streaming working, so those of you watching at home, but clearly the computer only really likes Julia dealing with it. She's on her way back from walking the dogs. So in a few moments while we're waiting for the laptop to speak to the projector, Jackie and Carol have got tea and coffee, refreshments. So do make your way over a nice socially distanced queue. Help yourself to some hot drinks. Thanks for your patience. We're just waiting for Julia to arrive to get the technology to work, because I've pressed all the right buttons. Well, I thought I have, but it's still not behaving. So we're waiting for the expert to arrive to get them to talk to one another. If you just arrived, do help yourself to hot drinks. We've got hot tea and coffee here, courtesy of Carol and Jackie. Yeah, do come. Yeah. Sorry. Well, good morning, folks. As you've probably realised, the technology is not playing ball, but we'll pursue. We'll keep trying. So I'm going to begin giving a little bit of background about how we've got to where we are at the moment. Then I'll hand over to Mark, the architect, and he'll do his best because he was expecting to be able to do it as a PowerPoint presentation. Meanwhile, Julia is going to battle on and try and get the technology to work. We don't understand it because everything is on and working. There's just not, the laptop isn't speaking to the projector and vice versa, so we don't understand quite why. But we'll make a beginning and hope that as we progress, the technology will miraculously burst into life. So may we pray as we commit this time to God and ask for God's Spirit to be among us. Father God, you have gifted to us these wonderful resources, many resources, people, money, and these buildings. Lord, by your Spirit, come and continue to inspire us and guide us, that we may use all these resources that you have entrusted to us wisely, with great enthusiasm, joy, and with a heart always to mission. We make this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So let me just outline why we've got to where we are now, and then I'll hand over to Mark. Well, as you well know, before I was appointed, you knew that you needed to do some work on this building. It's been discussed for many years. So I arrived with a very clear remit to do something with this building. And very soon after I arrived, we sold the curate's house, and that land, that money has enabled us to kickstart some work. It's enabled us to pay for professionals to examine this building, to examine the church hall. Because when we looked at the church hall, we realised we didn't have any plans for it. We had nothing, so we've had to employ somebody to draw up plans. So we've used a lot of that money to pay for professional advice and support. We've also used some of that money to pay for the technology that's having a bit of a sulk today, but has been hugely valuable during the lockdown because of having the screen and projector. We've been able to come into the building and worship without using books and bits of literature. Let's hope that it's not going to continue to sulk. Anyway, so that decision was relatively straightforward and easy to make. But then when we started looking at this building, I was certainly aware that we were talking big sums of money. We're not talking 20 or 30,000 pounds, are we, to invest in this building? And when it gets over 50,000, 100,000, that isn't the kind of money that you can generate from church activities, like jumble sales and raffles. It's way out of that league. And of course we will look at applying for grants, but that's not a guarantee, and particularly for church buildings, getting grant funding, you're fishing from a very small pot when you're applying for grant funding for church buildings. Community buildings like the hall, much more scope for applying for grant funding for that. So I've been aware that we are needing to reevaluate all the assets that we own. If we want to look after this building properly, we need to reevaluate all the resources that we own. And I mentioned that last month in April, that we probably need to sell the whole of the St. Francis site in order to pay for the work that we believe needs to take place in this building. I've jumped a little bit because in the time that I came here, I started the process of looking at how we were going to fund this work and also what we needed to do. People were saying to me, don't forget the hall, don't forget the hall. And I became very clearly aware how much you love that hall and how much we mustn't ignore it. So I mentioned to Mark that my belief is that we need to look at both buildings at the same time so that we don't make mistakes. so that we don't put the parish office in one building and then discover a year or two later, it would have been better in that one, or anything else, So we look at both buildings and say, what are we trying to do in this building? What are we trying to do in that building? Where is the ministry? What's unique for that building? Obviously, worship is unique for this building. And how can we use both these buildings well and invest well in them? So, as you heard me say, we have invested in having plans, detailed measurements for the hall, because we didn't have those. So Mark has been able to have a look at that and see what's possible in that building. So today is about, we've had one of these meetings about the church. You've looked at the outline plans for the church development, which is predominantly creating a foyer and upstairs meeting room at the West End, reinstating the gallery so that we've created an area, another door, and then kitchen over where the font is, and an upstairs meeting room, well, 2 meeting rooms actually, because as you know, when a baby starts crying in this building, there's nowhere for them to go. We all have to enjoy the lungs of a young child. So that's not the only motivation. Sunday school, PCC meetings, we could bring a lot of meetings into this building, and by having a kitchen and a flat floor with flexible chairs, we could have concerts and make the building more flexible. You've seen that, I'm sure, in other churches that you go to, cathedrals, how they can be used Monday to Friday in all sorts of flexible and appropriate ways. Manchester Cathedral, I think, had a gin event. Some people didn't think that was appropriate, but anyway, there are lots of things you can do within these buildings. So we had one of these meetings to look at the plans, and I was glad that you generally thought we were going in the right direction. You liked what you saw. The PCC has approved it. We've now gone to the DAC, that's the Diocesan Advisory Committee, and they're due to come on the 1st of June. This is an informal meeting, so it means we haven't applied for faculty yet, but it means that they will come, look at the building, meet Mark and hear what the plan is, the desire is, and make recommendations based on the plans that we're presenting them. So as a result of that, we will then be able to tweak the design based on what they say, and then submit a formal faculty to allow us to begin work in this building. But in the meantime, we're here predominantly today to think about the hall and also that overlap, how the 2 buildings are going to work in tandem. Because, it's not in anybody's interest if we make mistakes. So please don't tell me in 3 years' time, why didn't we do X? Or we should have done Y. Now is the moment to say, have we thought about X, Y, and Z? So I'm really delighted that there are so many of you here. It shows I know that you love the church hall. I know you're interested and excited about what we're doing. It does involve huge sums of money. Hallelujah! Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It was worth spending all that money on a projector. Yeah, you can realize. Yeah, it does involve huge sums of money. So you do need to be engaged in this, because this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really invest well in for the next 50-odd years. So I'm really delighted you're here and engaged in what we're doing. And it looks like I can hand over to you, Mark. Are you okay? Have you aged a few years? No. Okay. All right. Would you like to give him a round of applause? Oh, Mark.
Good morning, everybody. Wow. Okay, the hard bit's over now. I think I'll just take a rest if that's okay. Wonderful. Right, this was going to be very difficult to do without images. And there we are, we do have them. So I'll just move this out of the way. So my name's Mark Pearce. I'm an architect at Kemchip Pearce Sanderson, KPS for short, because it is a bit of a mouthful. And what I've done is I've created a presentation of slides, which I've left a PDF version with the church, so if people want to look at it later, they can do, which has got a few bullet points on it. And also I've got a couple of copies of the drawings that have been produced, which again I'll leave here today, so if anybody wants to look at them later, they can do as well, and they can certainly be distributed. And I think I just want to really start by saying what we're doing here is just exploring the options. Just like when we were looking at the church reordering scheme, we went with open eyes in a sense. I'm not a member of the church. I don't have any sort of connections to it. So in some ways, I could come and be entirely impartial, which is a nice place to be, because I can look at it with those fresh eyes and say, well, these are the thoughts I have. And with the church project development, we went backwards and forwards a few times, tweaked things and so forth, to get to a point where we had a general concept which is suitable and seems to be heading in the right direction. And as Alison rightly says, the next step is to talk to the Diocesan. We're hoping we're getting to the same position with the hall, and that actually we would like to talk to them about the church building and the hall building at the same time, because how the two work together will be critical to this. What you provide in one building, you don't want to duplicate in another one necessarily, but you want the two to complement each other and work together well. So that's really the purpose of all this, trying to get to that similar stage with the church hall in terms of a study as we have with the church building. So if we can just go back to that first image, if you don't mind. I just sort of start with that picture of the building, because it's actually quite a pretty little building. You know, it's a nice building. It's in pretty good condition. I've had a good look at the fabric while I've been visiting. But it's a little bit dumb. Just like with the church building, it's very much internalised. It's all looking inwards. And particularly the main entrance, which presents itself onto the street, is pretty banal in a sense. Its prettier side is what looks out into the green space, actually. So where we started from with all this, if we can go to the next slide. Right. This is the building as it is in the church hall site. You can see it's quite a large area. We've just been talking to people about what was there before, and obviously there was a lot of building on there, but now it gives you this wonderful green space, a space you don't actually have around the church building, so it's a useful area in itself. But the building itself couldn't be very much more simple in the sense that it's a hall with loos stuck on one side and a kitchen, and what used to be a hall and a few lobby spaces on the other. It's very, very simple in its form. So one of the things that came out, well, some of the things that came out of the brief that was given to us, which is listed there down on the right-hand side, sort of 10 points, talked about how we can improve the building by providing it a better energy efficiency with it, improving the heating system within it, creating additional spaces for letting, smaller rooms, providing toilets that were sort of heated as well. I mean, at the moment, the toilets are very cold, I believe. They're quite primitive. There's no entrance lobby. You're straight into effectively a corridor that takes you to the loos. There's no office spaces. There's no connection to the outside. Although you're surrounded by all this green space with different areas around the hall, there is no connection to them. There was always a thought from the very beginning that there's an opportunity to create a cafe space here, so that was one of the requirements. And also we wanted to look at how we could divide the whole space up, because it's a bigger area, but not all groups need that one big space. So how could you divide it up, and how could different groups use that in tandem, sensibly? And of course, storage. Just like with the church building, there's never enough room for storage, and the more groups you have using any building, the more storage you invariably need. So if we just run through these next slides. So we're looking at the initial assessment of the church hall again. Energy efficiency. As you can see, the heating system, we've had some analysis already done on the heating system, and it's already past its sell-by date, I think it's fair to say. It's beyond its operational normal years, and of course it's very inefficient. And you can see the sort of heating systems you have in there. There's one of those sort of convection heaters. It's also quite a large space, so it's a large volume to have to heat as well. All the glass is single glazed, not very inefficient, the fabric in itself. So it's not just the energy source and how you heat the building, it's also then how you maintain the heat within the building is one of the things we needed to look at. Go to the next slide. This is just to emphasize the form of the building we've been talking about. You know, you're straight in off the front of the building into a corridor, and there's a little photograph of it, showing you, that is your welcome into the church hall. So it's not really the most inspiring entrance, I think it's fair to say. Functional, but if you're trying to create a sort of modern facility, particularly for community use, entrance spaces are really important. You need a space to be able to mingle and gather, and particularly times like this where we've got to deal with social distancing, a bit more room is actually a great benefit. And it's always a shame, I think, when you see this a lot in church halls. You enter the hall, and the first thing you see is the loos. It's not really the best welcome. If you look at how modern buildings do them, they normally tuck them at the back somewhere. You want to create that open space as you enter. Go to the next slide. Again, just reminding ourselves, it's a lovely space. The curtains are closed there. It's a relatively sunny day, but it's a lovely space. But one of the troubles is it's just one volume. We've got the old sliding screens there, which are great, and I was just talking to a gentleman today about how that works. Is it Andrew? How that worked with, you had a gymnasium on one side and a classroom on the other. So there was always a way to subdivide it. The trouble with that subdivision, of course, is there's not very much sound separation. The loos are all on one side, the kitchen's on the other. You have to go all the way around outside the building if you wanted to have two groups accessing those facilities. So again, the simplicity of the building is a benefit in some ways, but it's also a bit of a burden in terms of how you might use it. So options for how we might subdivide it need to be considered. If you go to the next slide. Oop, back one. There we go. This is just sort of looking at the facilities you've got. You've actually got a pretty good kitchen. You know, most of the equipment in there, stainless steel, it's quite a high standard. When we could look at the budgets, we have allowed additional money for the kitchen, but the kitchen as it stands is good by most standards. But the loos are not, I think it's fair to say. No one would want to spend any time there or would relish the thought of having to use them. I'm sure they're very basic and unheated. Oops, excuse me. Next slide, please. Storage. I love the levitating door. It's quite curious when you see it. What's all that about? Well, obviously, it makes perfect sense. That was the stage. And rather than lowering the floor, the easiest thing to do was screen it off and put a door in the middle of the space. But it doesn't make access to it the most convenient, I think it's fair to say. And then when you get inside the space, you can see it's absolutely chocker. So there just isn't enough storage space, and access to it is not good. And also, there's no office space, just emphasising that. If we can go to the next slide. Hopefully it moves. Ooh, straw type of libbing, shall I? There we go. External spaces. So again, the top image there just shows you what it looks like from the green area. It's the prettier side of the church hall, but it is a lovely green space you've got on that side, which is predominantly west-facing. But you also have other spaces. You've got, at the bottom left, you've got an area which is actually south-facing at the back of the sort of hall, sandwiched between that and the wall to the school, which probably not very many people see at the moment, but it is a bit of a sun trap. It's got a lot of potential there. And then the image on the bottom right shows, as you see, as you enter the church hall site, it's just basically a sea of tarmac with some bins at the end. So in terms of how it presents itself, it's not the most attractive. Functional again, but not attractive. But there's opportunities with those spaces. It's good to have them. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So, trying to meet all those wish lists, those 10 items in the brief, and looking at some of the constraints and issues and opportunities you have around the church hall, within the building itself and the site, we've come up with this proposal. And it is, I think, we're on to version 6 or something, so it's been through quite a few iterations and changes. But ultimately, what we've proposed doing is looking at sort of 6 key elements of within the building itself. So first and foremost is refurbishment of the church hall. Come what may, regardless of new developments and extensions and additional works you might do on the building, the key thing is to get the hall back into good use and to a good standard where people would want to let the space and it can be more useful to you. And one of the things we could look at doing is dealing with the single glazing to the windows, double glazing those, bringing a ceiling in. We have a very high space in there, so at the bottom line of the truss we could bring a ceiling in, could put insulation in there, again to improve the thermal performance. And in tandem with that, of course, we'd want to look at heating, lighting and refurbishment of the loos. So even just doing the simple refurbishment of the church hall would make a massive improvement to it in its current form. So that's item 1. Item 2 on the plan, you'll see there on the sort of bottom right, is an addition. Obviously, we can't create a big foyer space within the church hall. There just isn't the volume. So to create that foyer space and a cafe with it, we're looking at a new building element. And what we're looking at there is a contemporary addition potentially at the front of the church hall, which provides you with a circulation, a milling space. It could be glazed, so there'd be views in and out, where you could create a cafe and have a nice entrance and reception, which then leads you through into the toilet area and into the church hall, which you often see if you think you'd go to a Costa. You enter the nice cafe space and the loos are a little bit further deeper in. So what we've done is brought the building forward, in a sense, projecting it forward onto the street more, though keeping it back a few metres so that it's not right against it. That's item 2. Item 3, you'll see there's a dotted line down the middle of the hall. Well, that's the line where the existing screen is. And what we're suggesting, yes, that's a really good place to put the screen. It's right where the structural truss is. It makes a lot of sense. But at the moment, it's just a very simple timber and glaze screen. And if you've ever been to one of those conference centres you might see at a hotel or whatever, you get these quite large, fancy screens which have acoustic separation. So if you want to be able to use both sides of the hall for two different groups and not, feel as if you're hearing exactly every word they're saying on the other side, you need to introduce a new screen which would allow you to have that separation. So again, a very simple change, but could make quite a big change to how you use the building. Now, in doing that, of course, though, you still have the problem of having all the loos on one side and the kitchen on one side, and the other side not having access to them unless you were to go around the outside. So what we're suggesting doing here, if you see, there's a number 3 adjacent to a little blue area and a little yellow area at the back of the hall. That's an area where we might create an additional toilet and a little refreshment station. So you could have a smaller group meeting on that smaller space and still have access to a loo from inside the building and refreshments as well. So you could have a smaller meeting there and a larger one in the adjacent hall with access to the larger kitchen and toilet facilities. So just making sure the two can work together in tandem nicely. Item 4, I don't think this is a difficult one to accept, refurbishment of the toilets. Just refurbishing, renewing the finishes, putting heating into them, better finishes generally so it's easier to maintain and clean. I'm not saying they need to be fancy toilet facilities like you might have in a lobby to a hotel where they can be quite extravagant. You just want something that's clean and simple and easy to maintain. And that makes a big difference. So often people will be put off from letting a facility where the toilets are in bad state. You need something which, again, not a very costly item to deal with, but something which would improve the opportunity for generating income. Ultimately, this building needs to be able to look after itself and maintain itself. It doesn't need to, you don't want it to be a burden to the church as a whole. It needs to be seen as an opportunity. So having good toilet facilities is an essential, I would have thought. Number 5, storage. So the storage where the current stage is makes perfect sense. But to make it more usable and increase the height of it and have more racking potentially is lower the floor within that space and have a direct access from it into the hall, making it a lot easier to use. You can literally just wheel things out rather than having to carry them either around the staircase through the other room or to have to drop them down that drop of a metre or so. But in doing so, we'd want to create additional storage at the other end. You can see we've got another 5 noted adjacent to the front of the hall, where under that window, which is quite high, we could actually build in storage all the way along. So you've got storage again on both sides in both areas, just trying to maximise it. And the last item we've got on this is office space. Now, at the moment, we don't have any office space in the building at all. And what we've suggested, as you see in the new cafe extension, there's a little orange sort of pinky area, which we said office, adjacent to the servery. That would be like a reception area. But we've also suggested that you could create additional office space up a staircase above the kitchen. So if you ever walk around the back and look at the side there's actually some windows right at high level above the kitchen. Now, the ceiling in the kitchen underdraws those, so they're not even giving light into the space. It must have been a small classroom at one point and presumably a double height space. But if we were to put a floor in there, maybe put some dormer windows into the roof space, you could actually create quite a nice little office up there, but have a reception lower down at ground level in the main foyer space. We've also suggested that there's a number 3 at the back, another orangey pink tone at the back of the hall, which is currently like a lobby space, but it's quite a large space in itself, and I suspect it was the headmaster's room or someone similar. That would make a nice little meeting room in itself as a standalone area, or possibly an office as well. So there's opportunities there, giving a bit of flexibility about how the spaces might be used and evolve. If we could go to the next slide. So that plan is exactly as we showed before in terms of the proposals to the hall building itself. But what we've done here in this drawing is put it into the context of the site and looking at the 3 different areas we might create. So number 1 is that sort of what we call the sun trap, that south-facing area, which could be a private garden space, secure, could have a direct access through to the school site because the wall's right adjacent there, and obviously has access to the kitchens and toilets very conveniently as well. So that's a really nice sort of private garden where the kids could use, or you could have more private events separate from the rest. Item 2 is at the front of the church hall. At the moment it's a sea of tarmac, but if we were just to do a little bit of landscaping, improve the finishes there as part of creating that new cafe and entrance space, again it would just help lift it. And then on nice days, you could spill out onto that area with seating and so forth, with the cafe, in full flow. And it might be really nice to have that sort of option for people to drop in. As they're dropping off the kids or picking up kids, they have the opportunity to interact, have a coffee, have a sit down. That's the sort of catchment area. In doing so, what we suggested actually was removing the boundary wall. It's only a little wall, but just remove it across that front section of the hall, just to open it up again, just to sort of connect it with the sort of public realm. So making that a very public space in contrast to the private garden space at the back. And then item 3, obviously, you've got this wonderful green space, which all manner of things, you could put marquees up on it, you could do whatever. Great space to have, so I wouldn't suggest necessarily building anything on it. But to help connect it to the church hall again, what I suggested we could do here, it's only one step higher internally, is actually raise up that area slightly, just bring up the earth, create a level area, terrace space, and then put some doors into the side of the hall from both sides so that you could actually go out from that space. Again, so giving you an opportunity, having a big event in the hall, you could then spill out into that lovely green space. So again, on a nice summer's day when we occasionally get some good weather, you could actually use that area. So it's trying to connect, again, the church hall into the landscape beyond and actually make use of that space. Go to the next slide. Well, I've put this in. This is one I did earlier, a few years ago. Has anybody been to Bramall Hall? Stables block there? No? It's worth a visit. It's not very far away. I was very fortunate. I worked on a project there, which was a lottery-funded project, where we completely refurbished the stable block and did work on the historic hall. It was obviously quite a large scheme. But part of it was creating a new cafe in the stable block. And what we did there was create a modern addition, which is what we see images of there, on the back of the stable block. So as you entered the stables, it was not seen actually in this instance, but when you then entered into the private garden, the back, you had this extension and new cafe space. Now, what we might be looking at, in your instance, not exactly the same as this, but of those sort of concept, is creating a very simple modern extension to the front of the building, distinct from the existing building, not trying to compete with it, but to give it a completely different contrasting nature. That new foyer entrance space could be something like this. Now, you can see it's as simple as can be that. It's little more than a very low block. And the reason why it was so low in this instance is the Conservation Office was very keen that it was kept below the height of the walls. So as you walked around the stable block, you didn't see it until you were literally in it. In your instance, we'd obviously have a slightly different approach, so it wouldn't necessarily have a flat roof. But that concept of having a modern building on the front to give welcome and sort of visibility and connect again to the street, I think fits very nicely. So there's just thought, and it's worth having a visit if you've not been there. The coffee's very expensive, but it's a nice space, I dare say. It won a few awards at the time, I think back in 2018 or so. So we did very well with that. So that's just to give you an idea of what this may be. Ignore the seating, that wasn't my choice. They went for sort of shabby chic. Not my preference. Okay, so we could just go to the next slide. So there's lots of elements in all that, and of course, everything costs. So within that, though, there are options. Now, I've listed 6 potential phases there, and I'm not saying there's any particular priority in how I've listed them, but when you look at any piece of work, and we've done the same with the church building to a certain extent, is you don't necessarily have to do everything all at once. You can identify what is the most important, what will be the best benefit to the church in the first instance, and then deal with those elements first if needs must, if the finances won't allow you to do everything at once. So, don't be overawed by the extent of what might be proposed, because everything can always be sliced down into manageable pieces. What you need to do, though, is make sure that the general concept of what you want to achieve is right, so that if you do then come to do a later piece of work, you already know what it will be roughly, and that you're not undoing something you've already done, and therefore wasting money. So it's having that, again, that master plan, understanding how that works, but also into context of what you're doing in the church building as well. So the two, think of them almost as one project, with multiple phases in both. It's identifying where you start and what is the most important element, or elements as the case may be. The more you can afford to do at once, the better, of course, because you'll get better value in terms of construction, but it can always be sliced up. So we can go to the next stage, the next slide, sorry. This is the numbers. Now, these figures are just really to give order of magnitude. And we're living in sort of slightly changing times, I think it's fair to say, so costs are a little bit all over the place at the moment anyway. But it's just to give you an idea. None of it's fixed in stone, I say that again, it's very important. But it's to give you guidance about where the major costs might be in these works. So if you look at the bottom section, I don't know if it's big enough to see how good people's eyesight are. The 6 phases are listed as per the other drawing. And you'll be able to see it with the presentation, the digital version, if people want copies of it. You can see this in more detail. But it's been divided up into 6 elements. And out of all the elements there are 2 elements that really stick out. There's the refurbishment of the hall itself. So before VAT and professional fees, the quantity surveyor, we've had a professional quantity surveyor look at this, he thinks that to put the new heating system in, to upgrade the fabric, do all those things, you're looking about 200,000 just in building costs. That's an okay sum. That would get your hall up to a reasonable standard. The next major item for a similar sum of money is the extension of the cafe. If you were to do that big extension at the front, new building is always a bit more expensive, of course. Again, you might be looking at another 200,000 for that. So those are the 2 major items. But then if you look at the other figures, 70,000 for phase 2, 50,000 for phase 4, and so 30,000 for phase 5, 10,000 for phase 6. It's all relatively small sums, and there's always options within those phases. So though when you look at the whole sum, it comes to quite a large figure, and you could spend as much on the church hall as you might on the church building, if you slice it up into the elements and think about what is the priority, it becomes more manageable. So I'm not trying to scare you with the figures, just trying to give you an understanding of where you go. And you need to look at those figures in context to what, again, you're doing in the church building to understand where the priorities need to lie. Can we just go to the last slide? The total, you all sat down, that's good, including notional allowances for professional fees and other costs and VAT, 800,000. If you're looking at purely the build costs, before VAT and professional fees, you're looking about 570. So you could easily spend over $500,000 just on the building alone there. And it's interesting, when I went back, and it's about a year ago actually, almost to the month, that we had an online presentation for the church building, the figures are remarkably similar. You could virtually spend as much on that hall as you could on the church building, if you wanted to. So the last slide just really re-emphasises that. Obviously, feedback from yourselves, that's critical in all of this. We've got the consultation, as Alison's already mentioned, with the DAC, which will be a critical step. And they are going to see the church building as well as the church hall. The church building obviously is under faculty jurisdiction, so will be important for them to comment on that, and that will be their focus. But for them to understand what you want to do in the church building, I keep on saying this, they've got to understand the context of what you're trying to achieve with the church hall as well, because the 2 have to work together. Yeah, I'm just coming to an end. I've nearly finished anyway. Now, then I was just going to say, establish priorities. Where do you want to invest? You're fortunate you do have some reserves. Obviously, you want to look at grants as well. And as Alison mentioned, it's probably easier to get grants for the church hall, ironically, than it is for the church building, depending on how you present them and what you do with them. But understanding where your priorities are in terms of both buildings and what you need to do first, what's essential and what's nice to have and what could be done later, that sort of priority will be a very useful thing to establish. And then the key thing is obviously to understand what is the best way that both buildings can work in terms of the mission of the church and worship, but also how you service the community. Both buildings will have an element of those to them. At the moment, the 2 are very separate, but actually what we're trying to do is bring them together. So I think that's all I would like to say.
Thank you very much, Mark. What I'll do is make sure that there are copies of these tomorrow in church if you want to pick them up, and then we can put them on the website as well so that they could, I think you've sent me a PDF. Now, I'm very aware that you've got questions, so maybe we want to, just want to sort of stand up and shake your body and turn to the person beside you and to spend a couple of minutes talking to the person beside you, if that's socially distancedly, and then we'll open for questions. You may have already come with questions and or things what you've learnt will have options, questions as well from that. But let's just take a few minutes to move, talk to the person beside you. I don't know if it's possible to grab a bicky or a hot drink, and then we'll open for questions. Thank you. You stay there, and I'll use this.
Okay, well.
Right, if I could invite you to take your drinks back to your seat. Olwyn is going to be microphone monitor, because we're not supposed to hand things out to you or invite you to come up here. But it is important that your voice is heard. So if you'd like to just raise your hand, and Olwyn will come, and you can take your mask off to talk, I think, so we can hear. So, questions open to Mark or myself, but particularly Mark, about the design, on the suggestions or proposals for our church hall. What do you want on the screen?
The proposed one, yep. If you slide on down.
The plan. We have the plan. We know what the building looks like. Yeah, sorry, give Julia. That's as it is at the moment. Can we go to the...
Keep on going. That's the
Keep
existing.
going.
That's it.
That one?
Perfect. Thank you.
That one. Okay.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you very much for your presentation and your time here this morning. We do appreciate that. One of the surprising things, Mark, is that you are more or less following the footprint of the existing hall. Now, was that ever in your consideration when you started to talk about extending and modernising and renovating? Because there's a good deal of outside space, which you've actually alluded to, the green spaces on both sides of this building as it exists. Green spaces and the English climate don't necessarily always go well together, but still it is available. And I was just wondering whether there's any consideration to be given to just extending current footprint in order to avoid having this expensive addition to the front of the building.
Okay. We did look at extensions all over the place, actually. We looked at an option where we extended at the back, so currently where the stage area is, and make that area bigger. Because, of course, we want to keep all the facilities in the same building. We don't want to separate it into a new building. You'd be basically starting again. And we also even looked at sort of demolishing the area where the kitchen is and the toilets and completely remodelling that. So we looked at some quite radical options in earlier schemes. The trouble is, I'm afraid it comes down to money again. The building you've got at the moment is really good. It's got some really nice spaces. What we're trying to do is make it work better and bring it up to a suitable level for modern use, basically. And the more building you do, the more expensive it gets. And for me, with your building at the moment, it's got an awful entrance. It doesn't speak anything outwards. So the reason why we decided to invest, say, the money and the expense in a new building at the front was deliberately to make a statement, to say, look, this is new, this is an inviting cafe space open to the public, we want to bring you in. So it was deliberate, actually, to have the change at the front and make it all visible.
Thank you. Tony, you do need to let other people...
I'll let people have a say, but just please let me just ask one more question. The area, the new area and the toilets and the kitchen seem very congested to me. They're all in quite a small area where there's an awful lot of traffic. Have you got any comment to make on that?
I have to say, compared to some church halls and a lot of public facilities, it's actually quite generous. Yes, if you were starting afresh, you might well make it bigger if, again, money was no object. But I'm actually working on an extension which is just finishing to a church as we speak. It's going to finish early next month, hopefully. And there, the toilet facilities are even tighter, because what they've tried to do is maximise what they can have for the amount of building and space they've got. So again, it's that balancing. about how much space do you actually need. And in modern terms, that's actually quite generous. It's quite generous.
Thank you. Other questions? One at the back. I can see a hand at the back. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin. Thank you. I hear rumour that with falling congregations that the diocese is thinking of merging parishes and closing churches. How safe are we? And yes, we've got the money for this building project, but what about the upkeep in the future? Thank you.
I'm struggling to hear. I think the question was about the Church of the Diocese closing parishes, closing churches. Was that the gist of the question? Okay. It won't affect us. All the time we pay our parish share. It's parishes that are not paying or can't afford their parish share where mergers need to take place. That doesn't apply to us. But thank you for the question. Can I see any? Yep. Thank you.
I noticed that the toilet facilities, they seem to be male/female. Are we having them separate, male and female?
You did pick up on that, yes.
I did, yes.
What tends to happen now in modern buildings, and again, any school building that gets built now, is you have gender-neutral toilets. And actually, I think it's actually very good, because it means when there's a big event which is all male or all female, which you sometimes will have, all the facilities are used, but equally so, where there's a crush to the loos, and invariably there is, everybody queues. So it's deliberate, and that's what you find in modern buildings now. They're normally not gender specific, and particularly with all the issues now about gender identity, it just removes the issue.
Thank you. Barbara, thank you.
My main question really is about access. If those two rooms, obviously we want this as an income stream, if the two main rooms are let, how do the people in the smaller room get to the front of the building without going through the main room?
Right, okay. The beauty you've got is there's lots of external doors. So you see the little pink area on the top left?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a flexible space, which could be a small meeting room, but it's actually just a lobby. So you've actually got an independent external entrance to the back.
But that means that anybody in that smaller room is going to have to go outside to get to the front of the building, which is not a good...
That's right, and that will always be the nature of the building, but you can still keep the two groups apart if you wanted to, because they'll have their own smaller toilet facility and their own refreshment station within that space. It might well be, actually, as they enter the building, they might well go through the main hall and then close the screen. It all depends what group it is. But if they wanted to, they could go around the private entrance around the back, or they could come into the cafe space, that foyer space, that neutral area. They could go through the door, you see that takes you through the back, through the private garden, and there's doors directly into that space from that private garden. So you can come in from both sides, depending on what the group's doing and how they want to use the space.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from a letting point of view, that somebody doing a yoga class isn't going to want somebody going through that room.
And they wouldn't have to.
Or if it's raining or snowing, they won't be wanting to go on the outside of the building either.
Well, they'll have to get to the building anyway at some point, so they'll have to, they'll still have to get into the building. Yeah. It's a matter of which side they come in from.
And can I just continue, just ask another little thing? The office space, again, it's a question of access. The office space on the original drawing was at the back of the building, near where the storage is. And again, if anybody's in the office during the day, they're not going to be able to get from the back of the building to the front of the building without going on the outside, without going through those two rooms.
Yeah, and what we've shown here now is an office space actually above the kitchen, so they can actually come down the staircase. Yeah. But what we've also got is a little office space, deliberately, what I would call a reception, within the cafe area. So it's next to the servery. And the idea is you could have an intercom connection between the two. So it's about having somebody there to meet and greet, and then other people who might be working away, doing work where actually they want a bit of solitude, dare I say, and a bit of peace and quiet, can work elsewhere.
Thanks.
Thank you. Is everybody clear about the partition and that there is separate access and separate toilets and brew-up area. Linda. Linda manages the hall, so very interested to hear your views, Linda. Thank you.
Right. It is about management. You mentioned 6 stages and that we could do it. Sorry, you mentioned 6 stages and that we could do it, ad hoc, as it were. From the point of view of renting out and generating income for the building and for church, how much time out would we have of the building? And if we do it as a sort of stop-start thing, rather than, right, we'll close for 6 months and we'll do absolutely everything, and then, people know, hirers know where they are. If we're doing it sort of in blocks, I think it would be harder to maintain a clientele. Have you any views on that?
I would agree with you entirely. In an ideal world, money no object, if this is what you wanted to do, you do it all at once, you get the disturbance out of the way, people would bear that for a short period, and then you'd be back into the building. So yes, the more phases you split it into, potentially, the more disruption it causes. But of course, the key phase, the one which is essential in my mind, is the refurbishment of the existing building. Loos, acoustics, insulation, heating, all those sort of things. So that's the key stage. Come what may, phase 1 has got to be that element, and that will be the most disruptive, because that obviously takes the whole hall, all the loos out of commission. But thereafter, you could even put the cafe on the front later and have alternative temporary means of entrance to the building to allow it to continue to be used while those elements were underway. Yes, there will be a greater or lesser amount of disruption, and the cafe at the front will be quite a disruptive element. But other elements like putting the office above the kitchen or creating a level storage space at the back of the church, or even doing the external landscaping in terms of creating level terraces and so forth. All of those, with careful management, you should be able to still use the church hall while they're being carried out. So it's a bit chicken and egg, I know. You've got to accept that the refurbishment of the existing building is the key element. That will be the most disruptive. But it's what you then do in tandem with that, or what follows shortly thereafter. And it's about planning, really, and making sure that you plan for least disruption, as well as the most efficient way to do it in terms of cost.
Thank you, Linda. Phil?
Sorry to go back about this. The toilets, when you said about unisex, I was at a pub over the week. They've got portaloos because of COVID. They had to get a separate toilet, which is a urinal for men, because it's sped up if there's lots of people in the pub. Sped up people going through because the ladies were having to queue behind men and they didn't like it. So can't we have urinals for men? If there's 100 people in the hall, there's going to be a long queue for toilets. And some of the older and younger people will be stuck in the queue and getting annoyed. Also, the second thing is I don't like that barrier above the toilets. If we're having unisex toilets, it should be a straight entrance so everybody can see what's going on. Just for security reasons, if you have young kids or teenagers, they can all congregate there. That could stop a girl or a boy going to the toilet and something could happen, which would mean somebody would literally have to monitor the toilets 24/7.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And in fact, if we were talking about circulation and space before, coming back to the gentleman's comment about that, yes, if you were to remove some of that space, those walls, you create more milling space. So yeah, that would be a very simple thing to do, actually. So that's a very easy one and potentially a good change. I suppose what I was trying to do is give some privacy, because there's always the worry about if the door opens while you're on the loo, it's everybody's worst nightmare. But it's one of those things. What's more important? So that's sort of one of the fine detail issues. It wouldn't have a huge impact on cost ultimately, but certainly when we get to the detail design, sort of pinning down those sort of things is quite critical. Urinals, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with. The trouble is, only one sex can use them, and they are dirty, smelly things. In a pub, you need them because you're drinking a lot of alcohol, and dare I say, once you've had a couple of pints, you spend most of the night in the toilet, if you're like me, than you do sat in the other room. I would hope people aren't consuming quite as much alcohol in this building. Correct me if I'm wrong.
We do have a beer festival in October.
Oh, really?
We might have to hire in some additional...
Well, in which case, I would actually think, get a porter cabin with urinals in, but don't have them in the church building, because the church hall building, because they're terrible things to maintain. Awful, really awful. Okay. Yeah, but a temporary facility, actually, for that sort of event makes perfect sense, actually.
Okay, higher in addition. Yeah, otherwise they'd be watering the bushes, won't they?
They would be, yeah. Your green space might not be so green after a while.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Just one or two observations. Could you think about access direct from the school to direct to the field without having to go through the little restaurant area, where all the tables are? At the moment, we have a gate.
Yep.
Can that gate be moved so it maintains that which north-south traffic flow?
Yeah, it's difficult to see, but on the drawing, can you see on the
I'm
wall at
not
the
entirely.
bottom?
Sorry, I'm not entirely clear of the question. Sorry, David.
Access from the school to the field
Oh, gotcha.
means having to go through that
Gotcha.
cafe area.
Okay.
It doesn't, because what we've done is, you see there's it's a notional gate, that sort of butterfly
and that
thing.
means you've got to walk through. If somebody's having a private function in that south-facing garden, the school are going traipsing through at the same time.
You would have to. Unfortunately, where the church hall is positioned,
So why can't the gate be moved to, the current gate, be moved to just by the new extension on the front?
it could be. You could
Yeah.
even have an
So-
additional gate there.
The basic point,
Yeah.
I don't care how you achieve it, think about north-south traffic.
Well, it might
flow.
actually, there might even be a benefit in having gates on both sides.
Yeah, maybe.
Just depending on how they want to, because the kids might actually be using that private garden and then
Well-
want to go into the bigger field thereafter,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
come around the front. So yeah, both would
But it's
work.
making them mutually independent.
Yeah,
The
certainly,
other,
an extra gate.
I share the concern about east-west traffic flow and having to go outside. Maybe that area needs a little covered veranda that provides you with a pathway where you can at least stay dry even if you're not warm.
Well,
You
the
know,
terrace area could actually have that. It could be quite attractive, actually.
The field, on the general plan, it'd be nice if, I don't know whether you can plot the football field and the running track, because we heard from the head recently that it is a real benefit to them. What we don't want is them all tumbling over a 1-foot-high retaining wall and then injuring themselves. So, and on the other hand, we don't want a fence there where they're going to impale themselves. Well, maybe some people do, I don't know. And the...
Mixed feelings on that one.
And I'm not too keen on an upstairs office. It doesn't seem very inclusive to me without providing some sort of lift.
Yeah.
I know Alison may be quite suitable to go up the stairs if it's her office, but maybe the next vicar isn't so fortunate.
And I appreciate lifts are very expensive and they take up space. So something, and again, you've got to maintain them, they're costly items to look after. So actually, I'd avoid trying to have a lift if possible. But again, within the plan, we're trying to give flexibility. So we have that reception area, but also we've got that other pink area at the back, which is that multi-purpose space. So that actually could be repurposed for the permanent office if you didn't want it upstairs. So you could adapt to suit actually who was using it. And if you've got different groups using the office anyway, they might quite like having different areas.
And this, I'm sure, is for future research as the project develops, but I'm particularly keen to know what sort of boiler you're going to use. Are you going to look at solar heat? Are you going to look at ground, and heat source pumps?
Yeah.
We have a big field there which could provide, possibly, I don't know the costs, but you may get grants for them at the moment. So.
We've actually, and I didn't go into detail within this because it's something which doesn't have a graphical element or a visual design element to it. We've already had an initial heating consultant look at the options for heating, and ground source heat was one of the options that was looked at. But what we have in the figures at the moment is something called a hydro zero boiler, which is a new technology, which basically is a boiler that runs on water and electricity. And what it does is it uses electricity to convert the water to hydrogen. So again, it's a very sustainable system, providing your energy supplier, the electrical supplier, is a sustainable source. One of those boilers I'm putting into that church extension to be finished next month. So it's going to be an interesting first year of use to see actually how it performs, because it's brand new technology. So this is the problem with the way things are changing so quickly at the moment. Technology, when I started that project for that church, that boiler didn't even exist. And we actually had air source heat pumps in the original proposal, which we got a faculty for. It was actually only later on that we changed it to this type of boiler, literally a few months before the building started. So we've got to keep agile in a sense, be prepared to adapt, because technology is moving. And with the targets now for both government and the Church of England being 2030 for being zero carbon, we will see a lot of change. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And quite a few of the questions, I feel, are a result that you don't seem to have provided any visuals And I must admit, I am a visual person, and I would like to see how this kitchen and toilets and the office space actually could be visualised. I think some of the questions regarding flow of traffic and flow from particularly when the space is divided, would be helped if we could see what it's going to be like, or possibly like.
The kitchen and toilet arrangements are all as they are. So the plan is there to visualise those things. I know not everybody can read plans very well, and I have to be mindful of that because I look at these things all day. So to me, it's very clear. Certainly the new building element is where there is the major change. Everything else actually is pretty much staying as it is. It's one of the joys of the project, really, in some ways. We're trying to maximise and make best use of the existing building, because of course the more we build, the more it costs. So we're trying to keep those costs down. So really the only real change is the extension at the front, which is why I tried to show an example of what one might look like. And if you'd like to go and see it, please go to Bramwell Hall. It's okay. Yeah, I think the problem we've got at this stage, we're at the very early stage of trying to get the concept right and not getting bogged down in the detail. If this goes forward as a scheme to the next stage, obviously we'll be looking at things like planning permission and all those things, and we have to then draw all the elevations to show what it looks like and put it in context. So I think that's when it'll become maybe easier to understand.
I did ask the question about computer-generated pictures, but apparently they cost a lot of money.
This is the problem. It all takes time and money. It does take time and money, yeah. And what we try to do with these initial studies, and just like we did with the church building, is do as much thinking as possible, but spend as little as possible, so that make sure you get the right concept before you then get, dare I say, bogged down in the detail and get to that stage. Because as soon as you get into the fine detail and into computer-generated images, that's when things do get more costly, I'm afraid.
Could I just ask, maybe I missed this, was there any mention of lowering the ceiling? Because when we started to do all these changes, if we lowered the ceiling and had insulation up there, we wouldn't be losing so much heat in the hall. And if we're going to have new windows in, when the new windows were built in, they could be built according to the lowered ceiling, if you know what I mean.
Yes, phase one includes lowering the ceiling down to the underside of the truss level and insulating, as well as double glazing the windows. Right. And what we'd be able to do with the ceiling form would then lift up around the windows to maximise the light coming in. So it's, again, part of the detailed design, but yes, it's allowed for in the initial phase one works. Welcome.
Thank you. Do I see any other questions? Yep, go on. Yep, is that Brian at the back?
This is what I spent 5 years training for. It's the bits they don't include in the curriculum.
Talking about the putting a false ceiling in, is there any scope for putting a proper floor in there and having extra space above it, like 2 or 3 extra spaces for hiring out? I realise that'll be quite expensive and would involve a lift probably, which you've just tried to put us off. But
that's exactly the issue. I mean, Alice and I did spend quite a bit of time talking about that, and certainly one of the future phases might be to put a floor in, say, not maybe the whole area, maybe just the back hall area to create extra space. But then again, you've got access problems, and the cost of lifts and staircases take up space. So for a very little amount of extra space, you actually have quite a large amount of cost. If you needed more rooms, you might be easier actually to build extensions, which are all on the same level, than going up.
Anybody got any other comments or questions? Yeah, go on. I think it's that Phil at the back again. Thanks.
Thank you. Just one question. The seated area outside the kitchen, or the outside area, you've got access going to the school through there. And unfortunately, I know the kids play there, and it's another kind of child protection issue that with adults were using that area, they could speak to the kids. And also that's got a load of play equipment and a raised area. So there'll be a lot of work on the school side to do.
Yeah, potentially, but I think you could put a solid gate in, so you could make it secure and only open it when the kids were to come across. So yes, there's a management issue to deal with there, and the nature of that gate and how you secure it will be important, yeah.
Yeah, also the wall at the front. I know it sounds daft, you're saying you're going to dismantle the wall, but that kind of gives a boundary line to where our property building starts and finishes and where the pavement is. And
yeah, and you often see this. If you walk around the streets in Manchester, for instance, you quite often see little studs along the pavement. And what that is actually doing is defining ownership. What is public pavement and what is maybe owned by a cafe or whatever the shop happens to be. So there are all the ways to define it. But what I was trying to do is create a space where people could mill and flow out into, and actually you make a bit of use of the public pavement as part of that, just to allow people to come in, just to open up the frontage again, to try and remove barriers, to try and make it more accessible ultimately. So the ways, again, these are detail matters, and I'd encourage you to try and think about the concept. These detail matters will be important, but what we have to make sure we get right first is get the concept of what we're trying to achieve and the general arrangement right. You know, exactly how we then do those details comes at a later stage.
When we first started to discuss this whole business, way back at the end of 2019 and the beginning and middle of 2020, we were promised a building audit. Have you seen a surveyor's audit on either or both of the buildings?
I have not actually as yet. There will be a QI for the church building, of course, because one is done every year. I haven't done that QI, and I don't know when your next one's due, to be honest. But yes, there will be an audit done. I have done an assessment of the roofs, however, completely independently on the church building. I did my own assessment on the roofs. You re-roofed most of the building. It's in really good order. The only area you haven't done is that aisle. And other than that gutter, which actually is in quite serviceable condition with a little bit of work and without huge expense, you've dealt with most of the roofs here. I've looked at the church hall as a general assessment, not doing a thorough full condition survey as such. And the church hall is, again, in very good condition. Yes, the roofs might be getting on a little bit, but they seem to be functioning very well, and most of the tiles are there and so forth. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the fabric. You seem to have two pretty good buildings now. I think a lot of the issues you see, particularly in this space, a lot of this is historic. We've had problems in the past. But, I mean, obviously, you attend this church every week, or most of you will do. You'll know if any of that's ongoing or not. But I'm hoping, from what I can see, that most of the issues seem to have been dealt with.
Okay, thank you.
And the survey on this building, were you referring to the quinquennial report?
Sorry?
I didn't understand.
When you mentioned a survey on this building, were you referring to the quinquennial report?
Correct, yes.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, every 5 years, a quinquennial inspection.
It's due in 2022, I think.
Is it next year, is it? Well, that might be quite good timing then. Does it say 22? Yeah. And of course, the diocese pays for that as well.
Bev.
My only question is, again, around the children. I'm a governor at the school, and it is about keeping it secure because it is their green space. They do use it an awful lot, and it's about them having secure way of getting there and the boundary walls and things that I've just got a few sort of, how do we make it safe for them?
And again, I'd suggest that's really important as part of the next stage of the detail. Yeah. Unfortunately, if you were designing this building again, you'd probably put it at the other end of the field so that you'd have direct access to the field. It would be quite expensive, unfortunately, to pick it up and move it, sadly. So we've got to kind of work with what we've got here. But yes, again, there's management issues to deal with there. That'll be a big part of it. And then where we put gates and how you get through them will be important again, yeah.
And we'll consult with the school, but obviously it was important to consult with you first. It's no good consulting with the school and then presenting a plan that you don't like. So it's just the order that we're doing things. But I do want to say about the front entrance there, the modern glass front entrance, that's very much thinking about all those parents that stand out there. Those of you who come round here at 3 o'clock or 2:45, those of you that live at the cloisters, you're aware just how many parents stand and chat and the children play. So this is about a community actually connecting with the community and serving them, so that rather than standing there, we can serve them coffee and they can be out of the wind. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Bev, I don't know if you didn't hear that, but Bev was just saying how she likes the idea of us providing better facilities for the parents and the children at that handover time so that they can talk to one another. And it's a little bit like what we've learnt through lockdown about keeping those doors open more often, that people will come in, but you keep the doors closed. You know, most of the time, those doors for that building are closed, or there's a group that's using it, and then you can't go in. So this, even if there is a group using the hall, there is other people can come in, have a coffee, use the toilets. You know, it's not blocking it to everybody else. I think it's much more community-minded. Okay, folks. Anybody else got any other comments, questions? And we just talk about what happens next. Nobody else? Okay. Well, thank you ever so much, Mark. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing back from what people are thinking. There is detail, isn't it? People do think about the detail, about what they want. So I've told what we're going to be doing with the DAC about this building. They're coming next month. What's the next process for the hall? If we think that this is generally, we're content with this and doing it in the stages, looking after the main hall first, what would we need to do next?
Well, the first next step is really to define what I would say is the scope of the work for both the church building and the church hall, to decide where your priorities lie, where you want to start, what you can do at once, what you might want to split. Yes, you've got two separate buildings, you've got two separate projects, but the two have got to be, I keep on going on about, they've got to mesh and work together. So where do you start? You could do two projects simultaneously. You could have building works going on both, but actually you might want to stagger it. So the first thing is to get your priorities right. And then once you've got the priorities, understood where you want to invest first, where you get the best benefit, then you start developing the detail for those elements. So it might be we start on the church hall first. And in the case of the church hall, particularly if the cafe becomes a key element and something we want to do immediately, planning permission is the big thing. Everything else we're doing on that building is all internal. So in terms of planning terms, very little. It's only the external change we'd have to apply for. So develop the external changes, be it terraces, be it the external building, and submit for planning permission. And thereafter, and I wouldn't expect it to be particularly controversial because of the nature of the building, it's into detailed design and getting prices from contractors. So it's actually a much quicker process potentially on the hall because it's not a listed building. Yes, you will need to get permissions for external changes, but you won't, dare I say, the process for the church building might be a little bit more drawn out.
The difference, though, is about how to fund the two projects. As you have said, and I'm very mindful, we need to use the bulk of the money that we have generated from releasing other assets in this building, with the expectation that we can get more grant funding for the community hall. So if we split the money, so I'm not going to be splitting the money equally into the two buildings because they won't. That's not how they're going to work in terms of fundraising and getting other sources of income. So we'll need to put the bulk of the money into this building and then attempt to get as much grant funding for that one.
Yes, and depending on the sources of grant funders you go for, they will need different things. Yeah. And each application will always have to be tailored. And it may well be that you have to invest a little bit of money in terms of the detailed design work to get prices back from contractors so that you can make some of those grant applications. And I've seen this again on the project I'm working on the other church, where they had to do a lot of detailed design first, tender the project, but then they were still fundraising thereafter, and it was a delayed over a year or more before we actually went onto site while they were raising the funds. Okay. So yes, it's a bit chicken and egg again. Unfortunately, you will need to invest a little bit up front once you know you've got the concept right and what you're trying to achieve, so that you can get those firm prices from contractors to allow you to make certain grant applications. So there is always a bit of a leap to begin with, dare I say.
One of the things that the Archdeacon mentioned when he was involved in the scheme last in March, he came to our PCC meeting. He said about having a feasibility study for the geothermal, and that would be something that we'd have to pay for, presumably.
Again, yes, if you went down that sort of heat source. Now, at the moment, we're suggesting a Hydro Zero boiler, which wouldn't require that sort of feasibility study, because it's literally a boiler you put on the wall. Yes, they're a little bit more expensive than a standard, say, gas boiler, which will be phased out in due course anyway, but you don't have the cost of having to do the geophysical surveys first. So again, there's a concept that needs to be agreed, which route you go down in terms of heat source.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll have more meetings like this, open for consultation. We've not been able to do it because, for obvious reasons, for the lockdown. But now that we are able to meet more often, then we can have more open discussions like this. Maybe we can break into smaller groups when the restrictions allow us, that we can do more thinking together. Because as you've heard Mark say, it doesn't cost anything to do thinking, it does cost money to do scribbles on paper, but it's a lot cheaper to play around now with the ideas than it is once we've invested in building work. So we'll continue to do more consultation together so that we're content that what we're doing here. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and do be praying for me and for the Future Foundations team. If you'd like to come and join us, what we particularly need is somebody to do grant applications. It's a paperwork exercise, it's an admin exercise. It would involve working with me and the team, but you've seen the figures. We can't generate this money on our own. We're doing our best to reconfigure our resources, but we will need to apply for grant funding. So one particular project that we could be getting on with, the last bit of the works that needs to take place on this roof, the south aisle along here, it's £20,000 worth of work that needs to take place here, and that will then complete all the major refurbishment of this roof. But we don't want to pay for all that scaffolding on that south aisle and then pay a whole lot more scaffolding again to put solar panels up there. So we want to dovetail the two projects together, the solar panelling and repairs and work to that. Because as you know, scaffolding is one of the biggest costs to any project. So that takes a lot of planning. Just one little bit of the project takes quite a lot of planning and work. And I'm working as hard as I can to keep the momentum going, to keep this project going. But I said to some of the team, we are going to need to look at possibly appointing a project manager, because I have a full-time job. And this is practically a part-time job. Maybe you could say something about project management. When we get beyond the talking and the lines on paper, can you give us some feedback on, your experience about delivering?
There's different types of project manager, to be quite honest. You get project managers who will just manage the construction process. And in fact, if this is procured in a traditional way, particularly on the church building, which it would be ourselves, as the architect, who would manage the contractor and so forth. So you wouldn't need to worry about that. I think in terms of, for the church, it's somebody who has a good understanding of the church, the people there, who can be the interface between the professional team and the church people to bring the project together. So it's good having lots of input from other people, but we need that single point of contact so that all the messages and instructions, what has been agreed, can be passed backwards and forwards, but also to coordinate things like fundraising and so forth. So bringing somebody in to do that is key. Sometimes it's somebody from within the church, if you're fortunate to have somebody who's got those skills and capacities. It does happen. But sometimes it's an external person, yes. And I know people who do this type of work, so I can certainly talk to you, Alison, about who you might want to approach if you want to appoint somebody separately. But of course, the more the church can take on themselves, it's a burden, yes, but the more obviously they'll be able to save the church. And what I'm not suggesting the project manager does, and this is where it can get very difficult, is that they manage the construction process. So that they coordinate all the different teams of plasterers and mechanical. Don't do that. Leave that to the builders. But you just want somebody who acts on behalf of the church as the key point of contact to take some weight off you so you can do your day job and deal with all those other things around dealing with the contractors. We will be the main point of contact with the contractors anyway. It's just having that interface, really. But a very valuable person to be found, really.
Yeah. Well, when I was in Duckenfield, my colleague up the road, they built a brand new hall, pulled down the old one. It was an over £1 million project. Wow. He was preaching one day about giving, and somebody at the back of church said, "Oh yeah, I haven't done my giving for a long time," and wrote out a cheque for over £800,000. So they were able to get on with their project, but they managed it themselves. And I saw the impact on my colleague. He aged hugely. So I don't think he'd recommend going down that route. I can't do it.
But finding a generous benefactor like that would be very good as well. It does happen occasionally, actually. It does happen. Yeah. I've had it occur to me a few times, where somebody has suddenly gifted a substantial sum.
We want to keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to keep the momentum going. Do be praying. In fact, can we end with prayer now? We just have a moment's silence, and then let's say the Lord's Prayer together. We commit all that we've talked about, these desires and dreams, these resources, this huge amount of money, all that's been entrusted to us. Let's hand it back to God and ask for God's blessing. So we say together, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. Thank you very much, Mark. And we look forward to seeing and hearing more. Thank you.
It's wonderful to see you all. This is the first presentation I've given in the flesh for over a year, so wow. I hope it was okay.
I hope we haven't frightened you off.
Not too much, it's okay. You don't bite.
And we'll have full copies of Mark's report tomorrow. I'll do some photocopying today and get them for you tomorrow.